Hello, this is Chris Ott, and this is part 9 of this series on metaphysics. And what I'm going to talk about now is AI, artificial intelligence. So there's two new concepts that got introduced into the world in the 20th century, and one of them was artificial reality, like in computer games and military simulation, stuff like that. And artificial intelligence, which is basically just computers running things. And I wanted to talk about AI because I think that AI is exaggerated. What we keep hearing is that AI is going to get smarter than people, and it's going to replace people, and there'll be nothing for people to do, and we have to figure out what to do with people. And this is some would say it's part of a kind of an elite agenda to convince people of that. But either way, even if people are sincere, I want to say why that's all impossible. Okay, first I have to say a little about what AI is, what it comes from. In the 20th century, there was a move toward reductive materialism. And in order to explain consciousness and things that had in the past been referred to as aspects of the mind, like awareness and thinking, we turned to a theory called behaviorism. And philosophical behaviorism is an extreme view, and it's the view that you really don't have those states, it only looks like it. So what we mean by happiness is that a person's lips are turned upward. A behaviorist named Ed Miner, who had his PhD from Harvard, and he was an extreme behaviorist, and he told me that if you take a corpse and you pull his lips up, he's happy, because that's what happiness is. So that's what behaviorism is. It's where things are reduced to behaviors. So smiling is a behavior. It's not an internal state. It's not a feeling or something like that. They actually reject that there even are such feelings, and therefore that they can justify torture at Abu Ghraib using behavioral philosophy. And they write white papers why people can't actually experience suffering unless there's something you can visibly see on the outside of their body. So that's why you can do waterboarding, and it's not torture, because suffering is not real because it's psychological. That's what behaviorism is. But anyway, I'm kind of on a tangent here because it disgusts me so much. But let's get back to where does AI come into this? Well, a little further into the 20th century, they came up with a way to reword behaviorism, and it's called functionalism. And it originally was called machine functionalism, and it arises basically in the 1980s. And what was going on in the 1980s? Well, computers, the desktop computer, the home computer, a computer that a philosopher can sit at home and play with and get ruminate about it and get ideas. So the new idea, rather than just say, well, a state, what we had previously called a psychological state, like happy, sad, those are not just outward behaviors, but they're brain functions. And that's where it gets its name, functionalism. So, and so you have this term in computers too. Computers perform functions. So I'm going to explain computers, and I'm going to show the analogy which is used to explain internal states and explain them away. To explain them away as basically machine functions. So let's look at computers. A computer does one basic thing. It works by algorithms. Now let me explain an algorithm. Most people know today what an algorithm is, but let me go over it. An algorithm is something you can program a computer to do, which is when a certain state is recognized by the computer, we could say state A obtains, then function X will be performed, or act X will be performed. So you have some kind of input, which is some kind of data input into the computer that it receives. Maybe somebody hit a key. And then it's going to have some output, which is what it's going to do as a reaction to that. So when state A obtains, state act X is performed by the computer. And this is done over and over. It can have long lists of them, like this follows this, and if this, then this, and if this, then this, and if this, then this. And that's all. And that's an algorithm. It's completely deterministic because whatever goes in, you could know ahead. If you know the algorithm, you know exactly what the computer's going to do. It's always going to do the same thing. The only exception to that is where a computer is programmed to sort of simulate a certain amount of randomness or probabilisticness. And that is where, when it recognizes state A obtains, instead of just going X function will occur, it'll go either X or Y or Z function will occur. And it's pretty much, it's random. It doesn't say, anything can be performed. It's limited, but it gives a parameter of what might happen. And this gives the illusion of things being a little like nature, where things are not so determined. But that's not the same as what we're going to get to in a minute. Now, when you hear them talk about these, folks, let me get back. I've said this before, but the best analogy for this is a thermostat. Let's say you have a thermostat on the wall, and it has a thermometer in there, and when the thermometer reaches a certain temperature, that will trigger a circuit which will make the air conditioner come on. And then when the temperature drops to a certain point, it'll trigger it to turn off the air conditioner. So that's basically an algorithm too. Now that's how they say the brain operates. You see how it's sort of behaviorism, just under different words. It's acting in a determined way, and that action is what you had previously thought was desire, anger, all these things, because you're just going to have different outputs. You're going to have a proclivity to certain outputs, and you're going to call those emotions. That's how they make the analogy between the inner states of the person, mind, and computer, and say it's a computer. Now, I just want to give one other analogy: an ATM machine. No, let me get to this. Sometimes you'll read that AI is reaching the point where it can do things like perceive. Now, I'm always talking about perception, and my theory is called the evolution of perception. So this is certainly important to me to talk about. You have to not be misled, because they're using a functionalist definition of the word perceive. They're not using what you mean by perceive, which is to take conscious experience of something or recognize something. A thermostat on the wall doesn't really feel that it's really hot, and so turn on the air conditioner. It just has an algorithm that when it reaches a certain temperature, it's programmed to kick on the air conditioner. And you go, see, that proves it's really hot. No, it doesn't. It just proves that it was programmed to do that with an algorithm. So anyway, perception is defined as follows. The functionalist defines perception as belief acquisition, which in turn is defined as data input, such as in the case of an ATM machine. Belief is defined as a physical state apt to bring about a certain response or behavior or output, understood as an output function. So by this definition, an ATM machine could be said to perceive the data on your ATM card when you put in your ATM card. It perceives it because it follows that definition that it has acquired the input of data, which it did in a mechanical way. And it is inclined to give you your money that you requested or show you your balance. So that's its output. That's its response to its perception and the proof that it perceived what was on your card. And then by other definitional alterations, functionalism can speak of an ATM machine thinking and desiring. It desires to give you your money, shown by the fact that it's inclined to give you the money you requested. So that shows that it desires to, because it's redefined the word desire. So it's just taken all these internal states that were conscious experiences and redefined them as basically behaviors that are controlled by algorithms, predetermined algorithms. In the case of a computer, it's programmed. In the case of their theoretical brain computer, it evolved to the best way to perform that function. Those are the specimens in nature that survived and out-survived their competitors. It's the ones that could perform the functions better. So, okay, so there you have that. But what's the problem here? The problem here is the AI can do a lot of things. Using algorithms, set algorithms, and all this, and a certain amount of probabilistic, non-deterministic randomness, a computer can do things like it do facial recognition, and it can do text recognition, and it can control machines, according to algorithms. When you have enough of this, then turn that off, kind of like a thermostat. And a lot of our world today is run like this. Our traffic lights, nobody's out there pulling a lever. They just happen automatically on a timer. And sometimes they're tripped by things under the asphalt at the light, where they can feel the amount of traffic. And the time of day is figured into the algorithms and all that. So it's very useful. Well, here's what it can't do, and that's what I'm going to talk about. And I'm going to say why I think that they're trying to convince people that they can. They had this thing during the pandemic, and it was called Trust the Science, and that you're a bad person if you're not trusting the science, or you're really irrational. You're not modern, you're not trusting science, you're making things up. But actually, trusting the science has nothing to do with science. There's a field called the philosophy of science, and it's a mature field that's existed since the mid-20th century. And in science, nothing is just received as true. That's like religion. That would be dogma. In science, you always have an open mind. A hypothesis is proposed when they're trying to explain something or come up with a solution to something, and then that's tested for a long time. And then if it continues to survive many tests for a long period of time, which might be 50 years or might be longer, they call it a theory. Now it's a theory, and we use this theory, but it's never fact. That's just not what science is. So somebody is deceiving somebody by saying trust the science, that you can't think on your own, or this is beyond reproach, it's beyond questioning by people. See how they're leading to the idea of the next thing's going to be trust the AI. Don't do your own thinking. The AI can think, it can outthink you. That's what I'm going to show is not true, and then you'll see why this is a dangerous idea and why I'm talking about it. So there's another thing in science, in the in the 20th century, a couple of philosophers of science showed how science actually progresses in history by studying the history of science. And what they find is that you'll have a paradigm, a certain theory in some field will give the paradigm which scientists work under. They work under that paradigm. But frequently and regularly, there are what are called paradigm shifts. And that's where you have suddenly a kind of a big change, a big sea change in thinking, because somebody sees that it could be a different way, okay? And that person proposes a completely revolutionary way of looking at the same data that is more fruitful, that gives more, a better or simpler explanation of the data they're receiving, because they have a new theory. That's called a paradigm shift, and the philosopher who coined that term and made this popular, this concept, was Thomas Kuhn, who's a really important philosopher. And then there's also Norwood Hanson. And Norwood Hanson pointed out that when we go to do science, far from being totally objective, we go to do science with a theory. We already have a theory. It's called the received view, the view that scientists are working under, the paradigm. And this paradigm influences how you're doing science. And so you're much more likely to keep reaffirming the paradigm if you're using the paradigm to do science. And what they called this is called theory-laden science. It's burdened with your theories. So it's going to always, it's kind of like a confirmation bias. It's always going to tell you what you're looking for. Because you're subconsciously, if you have a theory and you're going to study something, and that's your theory about it, you're going to set up your experiments in a certain way that are going to lean toward giving you answers in line with that theory. Whereas if you had a new theory, because of a paradigm shift, you might change those experiments, but they would be just as objective and strong, but they would not be assuming a certain outcome. And therefore, they may find something that the other was missing over and over and over. Also, they can simply, because you're theory-laden, the evidence could be there for a different answer, but you're just not seeing it. You're bracketing it out of your consciousness because you're kind of myopically looking for this. And that happens all the time, actually, in science. And it's a problem, and it has to be looked for. And they have ways to set up experiments so that there is a control, and so that you can do controls for those very perceptual mistakes that get made in experimentation. So it's not as simple as science uses observation and reason. It's a little different than that. Science also uses a theory or received view, and it organizes all that through that view. Very much like these lenses I've been talking about all this time. And in a way, the evolution of perception is exactly that. It's a paradigm shift in cosmology. That's very radical, and it would change everything if we adopted it. And that's why we're not adopting it at the moment, and I don't have any illusion that I'll see much happen as a response to it. But after I'm gone and it sits around, there's a very good chance that eventually somebody's going to stumble upon it and get as excited as I got 25 years ago. They go, wow, this works. But that's all, again, a tangent. Let's get back to AI. So what is it that I explained what AI can do, some of the things it can do, and how useful it is, and how it works. It works through algorithms, and then a certain amount of randomness is allowed to make it more lifelike. But what's missing? What's missing is the ability to, and I'm going to use this word in a special sense, the word see. I see something new. I see something I never saw before. I see a new possibility. There's a lot of ways we have a lot of terms for this. One is I have an epiphany. Okay? Or it struck me, suddenly it struck me that the way we were doing this was only one way we could be doing this. There's another way we could be doing this. I saw another way. I saw it from a different angle. All these are terms. a different way of viewing things. That's how I say it. It's how you look upon the data, or the cause of the data changes all kinds of things. But for a machine operating on established programmed algorithms can't do that, because the machine can't see a new idea because it's not conscious, because it can never see anything. As I explained, go back to what I said earlier, it can sound like AI perceives because they've changed the definition of the word perception to be mechanical, a deterministic behaviorist kind of perception that is looking. So it's like the thermostat. The thermostat doesn't really perceive the temperature, and it's certainly not going to suddenly have an epiphany of a new way to make another kind of thermostat. Or maybe, that's just not what, you can't program it to do that, because that would be like that contradicts the very meaning of programming. A program, when you have a program, an algorithmic program, answers are determined. And although they can be random, that's not the same as having a new way to rationally organize them. So I'll give you a couple of examples. I'll talk to my daughter, as I often do before this talk. I talked to her, and I said, honey, talk to me about this, because sometimes, even if I can't explain it to you, or it doesn't go well, when I finally do the talk, it often goes better. So let's just talk about this. And she knew exactly what I meant right away. And the example we agreed that I would bring up is something happened to her when she was a little girl. Is that she had an idea, it had nothing to do with talking to me, it was just thinking about shoes, that wouldn't it be cool if they made shoes that they could you could push a button on them, in her idea, and then they would turn into, they would have wheels would pop out. And so now you have roller skates. And so then, like a few months later, she saw that these were being advertised. They had something like this. So what it is how can we explain her? She got this idea. Somebody else got it too, obviously, right around the same time. But it was just a little epiphany. It struck her. She saw a new way they could make shoes that would be really neat. But like I said, if you've got an algorithm that always, when this obtains, you always go to X, then you're never going to go to W, because you're programmed not to. That would just be dysfunction. Now, my idea, the evolution of perception, this was a very, very dramatic part of my life when I had this shocking experience of suddenly kind of saw the whole thing. It took a long, long time to work it all out, but I suddenly saw you don't need all these, which I now call, in my second book, I call them occult entities, like matter and even energy and things like that. You just need these schemas. The schemas would be able to account for everything you perceive or could perceive if you put it into an evolution. And that idea, no one had ever thought of that before, but it is suggested in Meher Baba's writing, and I've been very open about that there's a certain amount of my idea that wasn't original, that was suggested, and some of it came from this person and this, and I've talked about that. But when it hit me that this had never been thought of, I just thought, oh my God, I'm going to be famous. Well, it didn't happen that way. But I did talk to my professor. He had to kind of beg me to tell him what it was. So I did. I wrote it out in 10 pages, and he said, we need to develop this. This is new. No one's ever thought of this. And he was very aware of the subject of idealism and so forth. And he knew why idealism had never worked. And this is a little like idealism, but it's not. It's an evolution. It's even idealism has a little occult entities that work by magic, and it's not what I'm doing. So now the danger, as I said, of not seeing this difference between real perception that people have in all the senses of it, including that way you see a new idea, you see a new way that something can be organized and explained, um, and the kind that they attribute to AI, which isn't really perception at all. It's just behaviorism. It's as much of happiness. It's as much perception in a machine as the happiness that my behaviorist friend Ed Miner attributed to a dead corpse, where you pull its lips up. No, you've pulled its lips up, but that's not because it's happy, and it didn't pull its lips up. You did, which is like the programmer just programming an imitation of perceptual states, not real perception, and that's very, very dishonest. But it's where we are. And there's a whole book about this form of dishonesty. It's called Words and Things, and I've mentioned it before, and I won't get into it right now. But I wanted to warn people, because a time is coming where they're going to say, trust the AI. Trust the AI. But the AI is not really making decisions. The elite will be making decisions, whoever's in charge, a dictator or whatever it is, a government, or they will be making the decisions and calling it AI, because it's a programmer that determines what you get as an output in an AI system. AI is not really smart. It's only an imitation of smartness. And its outputs are as clever as the programmer is, because he's already looking for that output. And so, they say garbage in, garbage out, and that's true about AI. And most people kind of know that, but they get fooled, because it's only so many times you can be told that AI is going to replace people, and they're going to replace doctors, and they're going to replace scientists, and they're going to replace school teachers and everything, because they're always going to be right. No, they're always going to have the same answer, because they're programmed to. And that's called an algorithm. And so all that will happen if the world really did turn to AI, which can never really happen, but if it did, what would be removed from life would be creativity. And you'd have stasis, technological and intellectual stasis, forever. Because that's what a machine does. It's on a loop. It's like a thermostat. It's never going to give you a different answer, because it can't see any other possibilities, because it can't see at all. And that's this talk, and I hope you liked some of it, and maybe it was useful. Anyway, I'll see you in the next part, which will be part 10, and I'm going to do that pretty soon, because I have that on my mind too to do. All right, take care. See you next time. Bye-bye.